This brown bag is titled Landscape Analysis as Art in the River City, and we're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Todd Lookingbill, Chris Brown, Taylor Holden, and Reagan Gifford. So I'll let them tell a little bit about where they're coming from on campus as it relates to this topic, but very briefly, Dr. Lookingbill is an associate professor of geography and the environment, as well as an assistant professor of biology here at U of R. And Reagan serves as the outreach coordinator for the Chesapeake Conservancy, working on the Envision the James project. Chris Brown is a GIS technician in the Spatial Analysis Lab here at U of R. And Taylor Holden is a current U of R senior who's just coming off of the SEEDS Alternative Spring Break program and will have great perspective to share on that. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks for inviting us. So I'm going to go quick. We're going to really move this along to see how much we can get in before that alarm hits, because that alarm is going to be a hard alarm, right? We can't really talk through it. We're going to have to move out of the room. Exactly, as Colleen mentioned, so we come from a variety of perspectives, from the kind of faculty, staff, student, outreach, partner perspective. But we really, this work, none of this could have been accomplished without a much larger cast, including a bunch of other faculty and staff. Probably everybody in the CCE should be on this list. A whole bunch of students kind of participated in some of the projects that we're going to show. And there's a bunch of other kind of community partners that we've been engaged in kind of as part of this idea of kind of doing some of the landscape ecology, landscape analysis work that's kind of the heart of my research, and trying to think of it from more of a kind of artistic perspective. Like, what are these maps and analyses that we're doing that really are pieces of art? The presentation, the visuals are really an important part of telling the story. And a lot of this was catalyzed by these folks, and so I should probably highlight kind of this whole crew. The idea that Alexandra and Sylvia kind of came forward and told us about this wall that's being programmed down in Carytown, and had this fantastic idea that could be centered around the river as a theme. And so we thought, oh great, well, we'd like doing analyses on the river. Maybe some of the work that we can do could be featured on the wall, or at least we could help to inform kind of the type of artistry that kind of will ultimately be programmed on the mural itself. So there's been a whole bunch of activity this spring, in continuing the work. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about happened in the fall, thinking about how to program the wall itself with a really nice kind of set of murals. So first off, we're going to kind of walk through, I guess, three major themes. I'm going to start, and then we're going to kind of turn it over to Regan and Taylor, and then Chris will kind of jump in after me. The first kind of project, little case study that we're going to talk about is this idea of linking classes to come up with some material that may be representative of the interaction between the river and the city of Richmond. It's kind of the human-environment interactions that are going on in the city of Richmond, focused on the river. And so this was a linked class between my landscape ecology class, where we kind of start to try to think about the scale and the framework of these interactions, and start to gather data to quantify relationships. Working with Dr. Litterall's statistics class in the business school, where they took some of that data and then some of the relationships we felt were important, they tried to quantify that, quantify those relationships statistically and return that information to us. And then all of this was being fed to this class that's going on right now. It's kind of thinking about what kind of mural do we want to put up on the wall. So one of the first things that my students kind of worked on in thinking about the relationships between people and the river is how has the population of Richmond changed through time. And so they gathered some data on that, and they kind of saw the general kind of increasing trend of population, and then starting to see this downward, this kind of this really common downward deurbanization kind of temporal pattern going on in the kind of 50s and 60s, with this unusual peak, an increase that occurred in around 1970 that they couldn't quite explain until they kind of went to the maps that defined the boundaries of the city of Richmond. There's this really nice map at the Virginia Museum that kind of shows kind of 9 steps of annexation going up to like 1920. I think it's hand painted, really a beautiful piece of art. On GIS, you can kind of add additional kind of annexation wedges onto the map, and we can see how the city of Richmond has really grown through time. I wish I could have put this legend in actual chronological order, but that's kind of fixed by the ArcGIS Online program that I was using to develop it. And we can see what happened in 1970, at least that's at the bottom. We had this big annexation on the other side of the river, too, which kind of brings in this idea. Now we're really kind of stepping over the river in a really large way, and that explains that. And that was kind of meaningful to them. Like, oh, that spike in population made sense to them. And also got them to thinking about the boundaries that they should be considering in their analyses. And kind of moving beyond just the formal city boundaries to thinking about, well, what is the right scale at which humans interact with the river? Should we be thinking about the city scale, or should we be thinking about the metropolitan statistical area, or should we be considering the entire James River watershed in our analyses? And so what they did is they looked at all three and kind of looked at changes in land cover through time for the James River watershed, the metropolitan statistical area, and the city of Richmond, and kind of thought about using common national land cover data sets, thought about how to represent these different land covers, including green being forest, yellow being agricultural fields, red's often used as urban environments. And you can sort of see kind of the changes in time at these different scales, and they kind of thought about different ways to represent that. So they had some simple kind of trend lines that are color-coded by red being urban again, green being forest, and you can see the decrease in forest in the metropolitan statistical area as kind of the suburbs continue to spread out. They all thought about other ways to represent this information, including kind of bar charts. In the background, these bar charts are representing the increase in impervious surfaces at each of those scales, and you can see the big increase in impervious surface at the city scale. And actually, if you can see this, the actual scale of the impervious surface, this ranges from 25 to 30% impervious surface cover. Impervious surface is a road or roof surfaces that rain basically can't penetrate, right? So we can think of more of that in cities, 25 to 30% versus under 2.5% at these other scales. So big increases in the city for whatever reason in the last decade or so, and also much order of magnitude higher total impervious surface, around 30% impervious surface within the city environment. That's impressive. That's a lot of impervious surfaces, right? You start seeing ecological effects as low as 2%, definitely at 10%. So this was an interesting analysis. And then they thought of different ways to put that together, and so they kind of came up with little GIF animations that kind of show the change in land cover from 2001 to 2006 to 2011 in the city. And we can see it's definitely getting more red. We're definitely kind of having an increase in kind of red area, impervious areas, developed areas within that city environment over that decadal period. Consistent with what that earlier graph that I showed. So as part of the landscape ecology class, we talk a lot about the patterns. So the patterns were just described in population and land cover, and how that influences different processes. And the process here that we're most interested in is the river, and how these land cover changes and population changes may be changing things like flooding events or kind of increasing nutrient levels within the river. And in turn, those processes affect patterns. So the quality of the river affects if people are going to move there, and kind of the settlement patterns and the population trends. We get kind of cruddy rivers, we're going to get people are going to kind of not want to live or kind of recreate or right nearby. So to think about those process steps, they gathered some information on river condition. And this is where we brought in Dr. Littoral's class and kind of started looking at the relationships between variables, and some really great feedback between the classes occurred at that step. So my class was kind of looking at relationships between like population and impervious surfaces, and was doing things like plotting them as two separate curves in the same graph. And Dr. Littoral's class was, well, why don't you just plot them against each other and put impervious surface on one axis and population on the other, and now you can really see the relationship that you're kind of you're alluding to here. And you can now, and you can quantify the strength of that relationship. So here they're showing how much increase in runoff or stream flow would you need to increase the flooding a foot. So for example, they said, well, for every 900 cubic feet per second, which is a measure of runoff, you increase in stream flow, you're going to increase the level of flooding by 1 foot. So just quantifying the relationship between increasing stream flow which is a result of increasing impervious surfaces and flooding in the city. The potential for those two relationships. Data-driven, pretty exciting. What they didn't find was there wasn't much relationship between population and flooding. So increases in population didn't actually seem to have an increase in the levels of flood that we've seen in the city through time. And that's not expected because that's not unexpected because that's really data, weather driven, and we haven't included information on weather yet. They looked at nutrient levels and saw an interesting pattern in nitrate through time at a gauge that's been measuring nitrate in the city. Saw this decrease following the Clean Water Act enactment in 1972. We've seen a great improvement in nitrate levels. And that can be represented more artistically through these conceptual diagrams that show how the river and the land kind of interact with each other. So farms and factories kind of and wastewater treatment facilities all deposit nutrients and nitrogen in the river. The Clean Water Act helped to reduce these flows, and as a result, we're seeing improving conditions within the James River ecosystem. And this can be presented, this is all part of this much bigger holistic picture that talks about the health of the river. The Integration Application Network out of the University of Maryland does a really nice job for all the watersheds of the Chesapeake Bay, creating these conceptual diagrams that kind of show, yeah, nitrogen's getting better, but we still, so we have a target, we have nitrogen levels that are now about 75% of their target value, but we're still having a lot of issues with water clarity that's only at 9% of its kind of target value in the James River. So that got us thinking about, well, how can we do this, continue this kind of this way of representing scientific information, kind of visually in an aesthetically appealing way, and creatively got us thinking about other urban analyses that we could do, and I'll hand this off to Chris at this point.
So this was some graphic design work I did for GIS Day in the Geography Department back in November. So it's called Dissecting the Spider. We were hoping that eventually this could end up on the Carey Street mural somehow. So it's called Dissecting the Spider, but we're also discussing dissecting the city of Richmond. So there are a number of ways we can dissect things. So we can dissect things literally, figuratively, but we can also do it in the critical context of analyzing. And so GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, and this is a technology that enables us to discuss different parts of a city, so we can sort of dissect out different components of a city. And this allows us to analyze certain things in further detail. So for the basis for this project, I decided to use the building data for the city of Richmond. So this comprises all of the buildings and all of the building footprints for the entire city of Richmond. And I've also highlighted where campuses as well. So the first way we can do this is an urban transect. So this is a profile of a city constructed along a linear feature, and this is normally a road. So urban planners use this a lot in corridor studies when they're trying to determine the impact of widening a certain road. They'll use this a lot, and it's also just a quick way to sample how cities change through space. So instead of having to sample the entire city, you can just do like a two-dimensional line and sample along that. And so in my case, we're just going to be dividing the city using transportation arteries. So traditionally, in the founding of the city of Richmond, the James River was what divided the city, and it was what allowed access to the city and also what separated the different banks from each other. And that's why we ended up with different cities of Manchester and Richmond on each side of the bank. So originally this was due to natural fluvial, but now automobile traffic is usually what divides different neighborhoods in a city. So with the advent of national highway systems, we start to see the city divided in different ways. And so when we've done this transect, we've basically divided it just in half. So we also need to do our lateral lines as well. And so if anyone remembers, dissecting a frog in high school, you can't just cut it down the middle, you've also got to cut it down the sides to really open it up. So we use the framework called Armature. So traditionally, this is a framework used by a sculpture, which supports a figure as you're modeling it. So you might have arms outside that you can actually mold the clay around. And our neighborhoods are actually created in the same fashion. So architectural historians and urban designers have actually co-opted this term and used it as well. And so this ends up being the city's backbone and structure used from the transportation network. So briefly, before the interstate highway system, we have several roads that most people recognize that have divided out different partitions of the city of Richmond. And this sort of weaves the spider web. And it's important to note that these are pretty much main streets in the city of Richmond and in West Richmond in particular. And so these have been named so they have a conscience in our minds. But they're also numbered, which signifies their importance for government as well. And so just briefly, before and after, you can kind of see how the structure is laid over the main roads. So now we're going to start figuratively dissecting the city. So we've literally cut the city in half and into pieces, but we also need to figuratively analyze it as well. And so to do this, we can experience Richmond from a spider's point of view. And by that, I mean someone associated with the university. And we are sort of in a bubble here. So we can project things about the rest of the city and not necessarily realize what we're doing. And our perception also colors our understanding about other places. So here's just a fun little thing. So some of these are actually true. Some of these are completely true. And some of these are also value judgments. And so when we create a mental map of a place, the city of Richmond, we can also project our beliefs on other places. And so that's very important. We also project other things, some of which can be true, some of which can't, some of which are a matter of perspective. And this is very important because when we project, we are reflecting our beliefs onto other people's space. And this is sort of a violation of their space because we can't necessarily understand what's happening in their perspective, yet we believe that we do. And this can lead to errors. And so in creating this artwork, I wanted to demonstrate how we can do that sometimes. And also that when we project, we are also creating this reflection, but we're creating symmetry as well. We're creating the illusion of order, that everything is perfect for us. And this is really important to think about. So why do we project these things? It's the distance that we have created as the city has expanded from different types of people, as people have become farther and farther from each other. And so this begins with the Federal Housing Administration when we started subsidizing new home construction, the American dream. And then as soldiers return home from World War II, they start populating all of the suburbs and rapidly growing low-density housing that we call suburban sprawl now. And this is a direct result of white flight, of whites coming from integrated inner city neighborhoods and becoming segregated and choosing that for themselves. And that is the issue of separation that we're talking about. And so we segregate through space. All of us segregate through space. We self-segregate. And this makes our perceptions farther and farther from reality, from what they should be, integrated. And so when people think about the American dream, they think about the expansion of suburbs. They think about better housing quality. They think about lower crime. And this is sort of the suburban dream as we see it now. And so to represent this, I have copied and pasted this expansion of 1970 of the city of Richmond to create the legs of this And so these change the structure of the city figuratively by adding these new arms, but also literally, because we have a structure of interstate highways and parkways that have been built around these new suburbs. And so with this whole phenomenon of white flight, we also have created a structure of the city to support that and to reinforce it. And so these are parts of systemic racism that are a major problem. So in conclusion, what we're dealing with, this project is about urban morphology, and Wikipedia gives a great definition of this. The study of the form of human settlements and the process of their formation and their transformation. And so the creation of these suburbs and the creation of interstate highway systems, the expansion of transportation networks, all of these things have implications for our everyday lives. Public transportation, commuting times, housing prices, environment, population, and many, many other things. So I will leave you with this. This is the anatomy of a spider superimposed on this graphic. And I will go ahead and pass this on to Regan.
Hi, I'm Regan Gifford. I work as Outreach Coordinator for the Chesapeake Conservancy on our Envision the James initiative, and I think we might have a tornado coming here in a couple minutes, but I'll try to get through this. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Envision the James, I'll give you some context. We are a sustained, collaborative, partner-led, and community-based initiative. All that to say, basically, we were forged out of a partnership with the James River Association and National Geographic in 2011. And the mission behind Envision the James is to create a common vision for the future of the James River watershed. And that's primarily focused on conservation and recreation. And so because we wanted this to be a initiative based very heavily in the community, we reached out to the community and we asked them what they wanted to see happen with the James River in the future in terms of conservation and recreation. And from this feedback, we were able to kind of identify 4 key areas around which we work. And those are heritage and river-based tourism, recreational trails and river access, so public access, conservation and restoration, and wildlife habitat. And so we grouped those 4 key areas into kind of 2 main goals, conservation being the first. And the mission of conservation is to conserve and protect important lands and resources, improve and protect wildlife habitat, protect viewshed, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute, and improve overall water quality. And then recreation, we aim to improve recreational access, so public access, getting out to the river, and facilities linking recreational features like trails, parks, and connecting people with the James. So protecting viewshed is one of our missions here. And a viewshed is essentially just a view, so what you can see from any given point. And when we were first planning Envision the James, we kind of took a step back and looked at the river and thought, like, this is a really historic river. It's called America's founding river. So there are a lot of stories. There's rich history, rich culture. And there are stretches of the river that we think are very similar to what the river would have looked like back when Captain John Smith was here, which can be kind of illuminated here in this painting from Richmond Hill, which looks obviously very different from what it does today. So there are stretches still that exist that are very similar to the way they were then, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to protect those, kind of freeze them in time to the way it was when the American Indians were living on the shores and Captain John Smith and his men were sailing. And this is an example of a viewshed. Basically, what's red is what can be seen, what's gray is what can't be seen. And so in order to protect these viewsheds, we kind of had to have a game plan. And so our 2 GIS guys, both of whom are actually University of Richmond alum, worked tirelessly on this viewshed analysis. And I think there's a tornado happening. So kind of just to pick up where we left off, I was talking about the viewshed and protecting the viewsheds that were evocative of the Captain John Smith days. And we wanted to protect those. So our plan, our GIS guys performed a viewshed analysis. And without getting into like the GIS jargon and all that, I'll explain. The goal is to analyze the navigable waterways, so when you could take your boat through, of the entire James and its tributaries, like the Chickahominy, the Appomattox. And we wanted to identify the general viewshed, so what could be seen from the river, and then also highlight the visibility of landscapes within that viewshed. So what's in the viewshed and also how frequently you can see those features. So basically, what can you see and how frequently can you see it? And so here's some kind of pictorial representations. Our GIS guys said, okay, what's the best way to do this? Let's pretend you're on a boat in the river. So you're probably in a kayak or a canoe. You're sitting about 1 meter, you're 3 feet above the water. What can you see from 3 feet above the water? And this aerial photo here represents the viewshed, basically what they determined you could see from a kayak in the middle of the James. And this picture is probably not that easy to see, but the pinkish color here represents what you can see. And you can see it kind of creeps up onto the land a little bit. And so now that they knew what you could see from the river, so they wanted to determine how frequently you could see certain features. And these maps here represent that visibility analysis, it's called. And it was weighted to kind of determine certain points, how frequently you would see that. So if there's like a towering bluff way out on the river, miles and miles, you're going to be able to see that from a lot of different points along the river versus like a low-lying riverbank that you might only see once. And so this map here, you can see the river kind of cutting through, and then you see yellow, orange, and red represents the things that are most visible, most frequently visible along your journey down the river. So that was kind of a representation of the viewshed and visibility analysis that they worked on. And then just briefly, Envision the James. So we have a partnership with the university, and part of that partnership and part of my job is to connect students, faculty, and staff with watershed resources. And so that can be internships or volunteer and research opportunities, in-classroom and community-based learning, field trips, and class projects, which I will hand over to Taylor to explain a class project he worked on with Envision the James.
Hi everyone. So I was in Dr. Looking Bill's landscape ecology class last semester, and our project was through Envision the James. So one group was kind of working on that mural project you saw earlier. One group was my group, and another group was mapping the pipeline, the natural gas pipeline. And so my group was looking at wetland health indicators, and the Chesapeake Conservancy and Envision the James had come up with kind of these ideas that they thought would kind of work, and then we were kind of testing them out and seeing you know, how things would go, and kind of giving them some feedback. So we wanted to, so one of the big things they were looking for is to develop methods of priority for conservation. So you have limited conservation money, so you want to put it towards the areas that will be most effective or most need it. And so we decided to look at wetlands along the James River watershed and size and road density to kind of figure out how those would impact it. So wetlands are very productive and diverse ecosystems. They provide dozens and dozens of ecosystem services. You can see some of the bottom here. And so we wanted to look, so this was the change in the mean weight average size. So basically just the average size of a wetland in each of these little sub-watersheds. So this whole shape is the James River watershed. It's very familiar to us in the class, but maybe not for most people. And so we had it broken down into 8 different segments, and we wanted to see the change. And so the really red areas, you can see they kind of had decreases in the average size of their wetlands. And average wetland size is one of the big indicators of how healthy a wetland is, because the larger it is, the more internal area there is and more habitat. And then we also looked at road density, so we kind of took the road network and put a buffer around that and saw how much, what percentage of wetlands were within a road buffer. So like we're within, I think, 500 meters from a road. And we found that roads disrupt hydrology, they stop species from kind of crossing, create barriers. They bring in, you know, human interactions, kind of, you know, stop sites, development, things like that, pollution from cars. So they have an effect. And so we wanted to look and kind of identify the wetlands that were closest to roads, and likely then kind of those would be the ones that you would check in and see these most likely need conservation efforts. And we did it with 2 different data sets to kind of also figure out which data set would be the best to use in future projects as well. And as you can see, a lot of the it was more down here, and this is kind of the Hampton Roads area, so there's a lot more roads and development there as well. I think that's all for me. Chris?
So those are examples. The Envision the James kind of projects, the viewshed and the wetland analysis, are all examples of their, their pretty imagery and stuff like that, but they also have very practical implications in kind of pinpointing areas in the landscape to target for actual conservation action.
So I want to talk briefly about the Terrain 360 project, which is a collaboration that we're doing with the Geography Department as well as terrain360.com. So Terrain 360 essentially is like a street view for rivers and also for trail systems. So one of their accomplishments is mapping the entire James River using 360-degree panoramic cameras like you'd see in Google Street View. And you can see at the bottom that they also have recorded elevation values, so you can see how the water flows down to the Atlantic Ocean. And so here's an example of the types of cameras they use to map the James River. And here's an example of something, this is the Aline Bridge. And this is an example scene that you might find on the Terrain 360 website. So you can rotate it and pan around. So they've also started to map some of the James River Park system. And so we are trying to collaborate with them to do part of the Pony Pasture Park, as well as the trails that lead up to campus from the river. So eventually we're hoping to get some backpack cameras on some students. So we're really excited about this. So that they can contribute to the project and help them map trails, and also to emphasize our relationship with the river and to have the students interact with it.
So that's all we have, kind of the example kind of projects we've been thinking about and kind of linking it up. Landscape analysis and landscape art, different ways of visualizing these human-environment interactions between the city and the riverscape. But there's tons going on campus in this regard, right? There's the whole parking lot project that's going on, kind of thinking about how to represent landscapes artistically. We mentioned the wall. There was mobile studios group that came in for a whole week and kind of set up their, what's that thing called that they set up?
The mobile studio.
The mobile studio all over the river downtown, and kind of drew these amazing, kind of collected all this, students and staff and community members came and kind of did these really, really neat drawings. And then the wall goes live April 13th through 17th, right?
Meaning that we are painting it
right.
and everybody is invited to help.
And this is where I start turning this over. So there's some sign-up sheet,
Well, I have
maybe
a
somewhere.
report here. I'm going to put it on the back. If anybody's interested in learning more about how you can actually help paint this mural that comes out of all of this classwork and incredible thinking, you can just put your name on this and we'll contact you, because there's a whole bunch of different times and dates, but just put your name down and we'll send you more data.
You need no artistic skill.
No skill, just enthusiasm. Yes, we will have design, you will help execute it.
Excellent. And there's also other things going on. There's all this artwork on the walls all around this. And Taylor, you want to talk a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, so these two, we call them traveling murals. They're from the Seeds project. We do 2 alternative spring break trips, and so this one was from our West Virginia trip, and the one in the back from our Louisiana trip. And so each group kind of took these with them on the trips and built on them, and then we shared them with each other when we returned on Saturday to kind of share our trip experiences. And we figured we'd bring it here. We have several seedlings in the crowd who afterwards can kind of stand by and answer any questions you have.
Excellent. And with that, well, thank you for your attention. So thanks a lot. If there's discussion, questions, we'd be happy to kind of open up more kind of broadly for that. I know some people had already asked as we were walking downstairs how to sign up for the wall, to paint on the wall. Please do that. should be a lot of fun.
As there's been new development in the Richmond area, I know you guys are public utilities, but what is the do you know how much the water usage has changed?
No, not off the top of my head. How much the total amount? No, not off the top of my head. So nearly 100% of the water we use is surface water, right? This area, we get most of our water out of James and the reservoirs. But how that's changed through time, I'm sure it's gone up. There's big efforts in terms of changing the infrastructure, in terms of the combined sewer overflows that we have, kind of moving the water out once we kind of get it into the city. And so we're putting kind of additional storage capacity underneath the ground to try to remedy this problem when we have big storms. The sewage combines with the stormwater and it all gets flushed out to the ocean. Water demand is also clearly an issue and will continue to be an issue, not just in Richmond, but worldwide. It's probably going to be one of the biggest environmental issues that we confront moving forward. Great question.
I have a question about the viewshed, I guess. When trying to preserve the viewshed and the quality of the riverbanks, are the biggest threats more industrial or invasive species, or do we know that? I guess it depends on where along the river, but I guess in the immediate Richmond area, what are the biggest threats?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, I guess it does depend a lot on where you are, but I think in the city, I would guess development would probably be a big one. Just loss of general vegetation around the river, which can be the side effect of a lot of different like human activities. But I guess, is that what you would think probably?
Yeah, I would think for the disturbances that you're cataloging, you're not just the cataloging changes in species composition so much, but changes in land cover from development. One of the interesting discussions we've had as part of that viewshed analysis is, well, what do we want the viewshed to look like? You know, that's actually that's a choice that we have that we make as kind of managers on the landscape. It's not necessary, and what's come out of that working group is it's not necessarily like a pristine forested landscape. The agricultural landscape is something that's actually valued by people in this watershed. So it's that analysis has opened up some really interesting discussions about landscapes in general.
Not long ago, there was a lot of public interest, let's say, in someone who wanted to build, I think, a high-rise apartment building that would disturb the view from either Churchill or Libby Hill. And I think that the idea got defeated, if I'm not mistaken, and probably it was in a large part due to the fact that the residents protested and resisted that blocking of the view of the river from Libby Hill. I don't know all the facts, but I know it was an issue, so maybe somebody knows more about it.
Yeah, that's a great. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a so the analysis that Regan described is kind of looking from the river, kind of looking out, and what do you see as a kayaker? But that's the other perspective, right? People really value this view of the river, and there could be a whole nother set of kind of analyses and perspectives, kind of looking downward and what's seen.
There was a meeting of the War Memorial, maybe part of the Envision the James, but I know it involved local architects, and basically they were asking residents to put down dots on the map to designate what viewpoints they value the most. And I don't know if you all have access to that data, but it's kind of like one of those things where they go in and you're like, okay, well, should I put all my dots on the viewpoint that I really am concerned about, or should I try to spread it around? It was sort of arbitrary in that manner, but it was also probably a good exercise overall.
Yeah, I'm excited about this idea of students running around with this. And particularly with that picture of the Gambles Mill Trail and thinking about how to connect, again, in more specifically and visually and tactile way, the students to thing that occurred to me though is you probably couldn't get one of those things underneath the roads. And it would be kind of neat to figure out if you could do a creek walk the creek all the way to the river rather than just think about walking paths. We're thinking about ways you could actually maybe put a GoPro on or something, actually crawl through some of these pipelines and stuff and kind of get a sense for what are the constraints to the water flow from our own West Hampton Lake all the way to the river, and what does that connection look like? And I'm sure there's a lot of challenges to that, but it's conceptually exciting.
Yeah, the underground culverts and kind of underpasses and kind of the submerging of rivers is a whole nother perspective on landscape. It's the subterranean landscape that I think is increasingly getting attention, actually. They're seeing, there's a bunch of studies going on about the wildlife value of those kind of, if wildlife are using those as corridors or not, if there's different subsets of species that are actually adapting to live in those kind of environments and that kind of stuff. So understanding and just looking into getting a snapshot of that from that perspective would be really neat. I like that. I don't know if I want to crawl in there though. I'll put a GoPro on a tennis ball or something like that. Yeah, Izzy.
I'm kind of curious about the mentioning of the pipeline, and I don't know that much about it, so I was wondering if that is projected to affect the viewshed or the James at all directly or indirectly.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation that I'll be happy to talk with you offline about. And we can have another talk about that. And we have ongoing analyses kind of in that regard. Which we can chat some more about.
I was just follow up on that question. Have you all had any discussion with sort of the sub-discussion involving the Shaka Stadium controversy about daylighting Shaka Creek?
We, as a university, we haven't had conversations about that. I don't know as part of the Vision of James initiative, has that come into the conversation at all?
Not too much, no.
This idea of daylighting creeks, though, is really fascinating to me. And just restoring creeks, I have a dream that that this creek that's embedded in this concrete culvert right here, going back to the factory, one day is going to become naturalized again.
Is that what daylighting means?
Daylight is when it's covered, when it's basically in a pipe underground, and then you kind of bring it back to the surface. It's a related kind of motion.
It's pretty foamy out there today.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah.
A question kind of about the viewshed. I know, like, from the river, you view, like, the places in red are places you can see. A question that came to my mind was, for the places you can't see from the river, I wonder if industry or if organizations will take the fact that that can't be seen from the river and then use those places to, like, build things or put infrastructure, put industry, just by justifying it with the fact that you can't see it from the river. What do you think of how people will react to, like, yeah, you can see these areas, but these are ones you can't see?
I've never thought of it like that before, I guess. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. I don't know about that. Like, I don't know how we would work to prevent that, I guess.
I guess the idea with the analyses is that it's just, it's assuming that there's development going on, right? And it's prioritizing which areas not to do. Which, I guess you could think of a model that would incentivize new development, but I'd have to think about how the logistics of that would work. You're right. I mean, there is definitely part of this landscape analysis approach is creating a lot of new data and a lot of new information. And a lot of times you don't necessarily have control over that information once it's created. Getting back to the pipeline question, I'm not ready to talk about that yet because I don't. I want to feel more comfortable in kind of in how the information I'm putting forth before I lose control. Right. It's 1:25. I actually have class at 1:30. So I have to go. Thank you for coming. Welcome to kind of look around at the art on the wall and so forth.